We're here with my parents, Mary Ann and James Gata, and we're doing an interview. So let me start off with my mother. Mom, where were you born?
Brooklyn, New York, and proud of it.
And where were your parents born?
Well, my mom was born in upstate New York, I think Nyack, and my father was born in Italy.
Okay. And how old were you when they first came here?
Well, my
How old were
father,
they when they first came?
well, my father was, my mother was born here, but my father was 2 years old when he came from Italy. He came with his parents.
And how did they like it here?
Evidently, they liked it because they stayed here, and she ended up having 10 children. My father was one of 10.
Wow.
And
Dad, what about you? Where were your parents born?
Well, my father was born in Salerno, and he came here as an infant. He was 1 year old. My grandmother brought him here. And my mother came here she was 15 when she came here. And she was from Tolve, which is a mountain town just south of Naples.
Okay. And I'm just going to stand over here now and interview you from over here. Okay, Mom, what did you want to be when you grew up?
At first, I wanted to be a gymnastics teacher, but I wanted to be a teacher of some kind. I never became a teacher, but I taught a lot of things through my life. I taught girls basketball and softball. I taught bridge. I taught lots of card games to people. So I got my teacher, and right now, I'm currently teaching swim aerobics in the pool.
Good, good. Dad, what about you?
Well, when I was young, I'd say early teenager, I wanted to be an artist, commercial artist. I used to draw and do pictures, etc. And then as I got older, I was thinking of medicine, becoming a doctor. In fact, when I went to college, that was my goal, to be pre-med. But after a couple of years, as an underclassman, I found it was not for me. It was too tough. I didn't have what it took. So I compromised and I stuck with science and biology and decided to teach it in the schools.
Ultimately, though, Jim, you became a high school principal.
Yeah, but I was a teacher first. I taught for 13 years. And then I took some courses in administration and applied, and I got a job in New Jersey as a principal.
How long were you a principal?
About 24 years.
So what attracted you to each other?
We were at a party that my sister's friend invited her to, and they needed boys because all of a sudden she was going to have more boys than girls. So my sister asked me if I would go. Now I got to the party, and my sister saw 2 seats, and she says, "Mary Ann, I'll go get some drinks. You watch the seats." So there was an empty seat for my sister, and I was sitting down, and all of a sudden this tall, dark, handsome man comes along. And he says, "Is that seat taken?" And I take one look at him and I say, "No, that's not taken." So my sister comes back with the 2 glasses of soda in her hands, and she looks at me, she looks at him, and she gives me a knowing smile, gives me the glass, and she walked away. So I guess it was looks that attracted me first.
And Dad, what about you? What attracted you to Mom?
Well, she was very attractive and seemed friendly and pretty relaxed. She didn't put on airs or anything. Very natural. And, I think we danced too, right, that night?
Oh, he was a good dancer. Yeah,
But
and I think I was too.
I wasn't in good shape though. I had a tape over my eye and I had a broken tooth. I think either the day before or that day, fooling around in the shower, I slipped at college and I smacked my head against the tile.
Yeah,
I had a half shiner, a tape over my eye, and a split tooth.
and that attracted me too, because at the time I liked tough guys.
Like the bad boys.
Yeah, not bad, but tough. He was very manly. And it was funny because we were dancing, and while we were dancing, he asked me how old I was. Well, I thought he was 25, and I had just turned 17. So I said to myself, gee, should I tell him how old I am? And, would he be upset? And then I said, the heck with it. So I said to him, well, I'm only 17. Some girls lie about their age, but I don't believe in lying. He says, oh, okay, I'm only 18. So I was so happy I didn't lie.
And where did you guys go on your first few dates?
Oh, God. The first date, my sister came over, and she was studying to work for Avon or something. She was doing makeup. So she made me all up with all her products. And the doorbell rings, and Jim comes to the door, and he takes one look at me, and he says, you gotta wash your face. He didn't like it at all. It was he says, you're gonna meet my friends. I don't want them to see you like that. So I listened, I washed my face. And the first date was at, what kind of dance was it, Jim?
Museum. We went to the Museum of Art.
No, the first date was your
First
dance.
date, no. First
Oh,
date we
okay,
went to the
I
Museum
stand to
of
be
Art,
corrected.
which is a cheap date, by the way.
And I
We
thought he
went to the
was,
city, and I think there was a Van Gogh exhibit that we saw.
and you were so intelligent. He knew all about, not only what the painting was, but all about the painter. And I thought he was so intelligent, and that impressed me a lot.
Yeah, so I think we spent the day, it was a Saturday, we spent the day in the city, but mostly at the museum.
Okay, what was the second date?
I don't know, I don't remember.
Well, I think the second date was probably the party, and that's when I was all made up. And the third date, I remember, we went to an opera, and I hated opera at the time. I absolutely hated it. And I go because he liked it, and after all, I liked him. So I've come to really like opera now. I didn't like it then because I didn't understand what was going on. But now, every time we go to an opera, ahead of time, I go on the internet, I read out all about it, and a lot of places now have the words that they're saying on a screen, so you know what's going on.
Yeah.
Because I enjoyed the costumes and all, but I didn't enjoy not knowing what was going on. So anyway, I like it now. That was our third date.
Went to the Brooklyn Academy of Music. We sat in the third balcony. I think the seats were $1 each.
That time
And
it
it
was
was like a
that was
third,
a lot.
fourth rate opera, but it was opera, with an orchestra and singers, and I enjoyed it.
It was what you could afford, Jimmy.
Yeah.
He was-
Salmaggi Opera Company in Brooklyn.
He was still in school, so we didn't have a lot. And you know what else we did, John? When we were courting, we went together for 3.5 years. And in those times, neither one of us had money to go to fancy places or anything. But the park, Prospect Park, is in Brooklyn. And the park had activities 3 days a week, 3 nights a week. Wednesday night was square dancing. Remember that, Jim?
Yeah.
We learned how to square dance. And then Friday night, all the big bands would come in and play. And we both loved music, so we both enjoyed that. And then Saturday night, it was what we called then cheek-to-cheek dancing. It was all romantic music, and you danced under the stars. It was all outdoors and all free. And then in between, we would go to movies and what else? The museums. Oh, and roller skating. He took me a couple of times to roller skate.
And what things did you discuss when considering the possibility of spending the future together?
Do you remember, Jim? I remember.
I don't know if we discussed much. It was like there were a lot of assumptions, We've been out for so long, and there was an assumption.
Well, I could tell you things that I pumped him with. First of all, my mom was not a good housekeeper, and I was asking him, I was afraid of getting married. I was only 17 when I met him, and it was getting serious right away. Maybe within the first year, I think we were pretty much in love. And I was asking him, well, what if I don't want it? What if I'm lazy and I don't want to do something? He says, oh, I'll do it. And then I asked him, well, what foods do you like? And he would say eggplant parmesan and some other things.
All the stuff she liked.
And then I said, oh, this is great, you know. But then I come to find out that he likes eggplant, not eggplant parmesan, but eggplant stuffed or eggplant with other things, while I liked eggplant parmesan. We didn't find that out until after we got married. But it was still eggplant and I still liked it.
Okay. And how long did you go together before you got married? How long did you date for?
3.5 years. It was a long time. And then he was going to go into the service. And I didn't want to wait until he came out. So then we finally decided. I was 20, he was 22. We decided we would get married.
Okay, so Dad, what kind of ceremony did you have for the wedding?
Well, we were
Where
married
was
in
it?
church, her church, where she lived. And then afterwards, we had a reception in New York City at the Park Sheraton Hotel,
The Coconut Grove,
the Coconut Grove. And we had about how many people?
under 25.
Yeah, over 100 people, mostly relatives, some friends. And it was very nice.
That was a time when they didn't have cocktail hour and all that, hors d'oeuvres, and it was a very fancy wedding.
And tell us about the honeymoon.
Oh, my mother, all her life, all my life, told me about going to Bermuda on her honeymoon. That's where my parents went. So all my life, of course, I wanted to go to Bermuda on my honeymoon. So that's what we did, and I couldn't wait to get there. It was pouring rain the night before we left, and the day we left on the plane, it was pouring. And I couldn't wait to get to Bermuda, thinking it was going to be clear. Instead, it was still pouring rain. I was so disappointed. But we had the rain cleared up, and we had a great time. We stayed at the Elbow Beach Surf Club.
Elbow Beach Hotel.
Yeah.
Okay, and Mom, what childhood memories do you have? Tell us about your childhood. And
You know, with my father and mother, they loved to travel, so at least 2 times a year we would go places. But I remember when I was real little, I remember my father bathing my sister and I. I guess he used to help my mother out. And one day we were fooling around. We wanted to taste what soap, you know, we had Ivory soap, and it looked so good. My sister and I tasted it. Oh, we never tasted it again. But the thing that really stands out, we had this wardrobe, and it had a shelf up on top. And one day my father played hide and seek with the 3 of us. I have a sister and a brother and I was the youngest. And I was only maybe, I don't know, 2.5, maybe 3 years old. And my father hid me up on that shelf and then closed the door. And I was very scared, but he told me, don't say anything. So I closed my eyes and I just waited there. And I got the greatest kick out of the fact that my brother and sister couldn't find me. So, but travel, we did a lot of traveling. And then with my grandparents, oh my God, I had so much fun. My grandpa retired when he was in his 50s. He was a machinist, and he caught his hand in the machine and was forced into retirement. And as a result, he stayed home and he taught me chess, he taught me checkers. He had a book of Hoyle, and all of the games practically in there we would learn. Every once in a while he would say, let's learn a new one. So I now have a tremendous love for games. And my grandma was adorable. We used to call her potato chip grandma. My children, when they grew up, you guys said called her potato. She always had potato chips next to her, and a bottle of water. And my grandma, believe it or not, smoked Camel cigarettes. And when we came over her as children, she would take the cigarette and go up like this, and it would make circles. And we got the greatest kick out of that. So she more played with them than smoked them when we were there.
She never inhaled,
No.
She never inhaled.
Well, that's why she lived to be a ripe old age. But the greatest thing with my grandma were tea parties. She would invite me, let me invite my friends, and I used to have a little child's teacup set, with saucers and little plates. And my grandpa used to like to bake cookies, so my friends would come over and we'd have a tea party. Of course, the tea was really more milk than anything. But those were my memories. I had lots of them.
What was your favorite subject in school?
Believe it or not, I loved math. And I was very good at it. Usually the boys were good, but I was very good at math.
Okay, and Dad, what do you remember about your childhood
Well, I was
experiences?
born in the middle of New York City, a very urban area. One of my earliest memories was that my mother's mother, my grandmother, lived with us. So I was maybe 3, 4 years old, and I remember her. In fact, when I was that age, I was able to speak Italian fluently and understand Italian. But as I got older, I forgot how to speak. I mean, I understand, and I know some words. She passed away, and we moved to another street. And there were a lot of kids in the block. I mean, one block in New York City, you must have had at least 25 kids around our age. So there was always things to do outside. But life was very simple. Like listening to the radio, going to the movie was a big deal. I remember being very small going to the movie, and my mother would seat me on the armrest, and I'd sit on the armrest in order to watch the movie because I was so little. And the kids, one of the things that we used to do, we joined the Boys Club as 10, 11-year-olds, and the Boys Club was within walking distance. It had a pool, it had a game room, and it had the art clubs too, which I was interested in. That's how I learned how to draw. But the big memory, of course, with the family was the beach. Even though we lived in the heart of Manhattan, my folks always found a way in the summer to go to the beach, including weekdays, and especially on weekends. And we traveled an hour, hour and a half in a sticky, itchy woolen bathing suit underneath our clothes to Coney Island or Orchard Beach or even to Greece Park.
Yeah, all the bathing suits were made out of wool then. It was very itchy, especially when the sand got in them, and they took forever to dry. We used to go to the beach a lot too. And in fact, I went with my girlfriends. One day we went there and it was so hot, we had to leave immediately. We were getting heat frustration. There were days when you couldn't even walk on the sand, your feet burned. But I was a real tomboy, I guess you'd say. I used to like to hop bushes and hop fences, and my friends and I would climb up on the roofs of the building and jump from one roof to another. And there was only like a foot between, but it was still very dangerous. And we'd get sticks and sword fight up there. So when I ended up, anyway, that was part of my childhood too, memories.
And Dad, over the years, you've seen all kinds of changes, through like electronic changes and things. What would you say was the biggest thing that happened during your lifetime?
Well, I've been around a few years, and things happen like clouds move across the sky. And here comes this cloud, and that goes, and another cloud, and that goes. A lot of big memories, like the Second War. During the Second War, I was a teenager, luckily, and I wasn't in the war. But I remember relatives and friends going to war. I remember a couple of young guys that I knew who were killed in the Navy, for example. But I think the most exciting time was after the war, when the country got back into gear, where the economy was growing and people were able to buy cars. All of a sudden, people had a little more money than they did during the Depression, because I also lived during the Depression, but I was very young.
When I was little, we had a room in our house, because during the war, they would have air raids, and everybody had to close their lights. But we had a room that was in the basement, off of the basement, and there were no windows in it. And so we used to go in there and we would draw pictures, my sister, my brother, and I. And then my mother would put them on the wall because the walls weren't finished. And it was a very hard time because they had rationing of food. And you only got a certain, you used to get coupons for meat, so you could only have so much meat during the week, and so many eggs, and so much butter and stuff. But the biggest exciting thing for me was when TV was invented. My girlfriend got her parents got one of the first TVs. It was only 5 inches, and we'd all crowd around looking at that 5-inch TV, and we couldn't get over the fact that it was happening while, we knew what movies were, but this was live. These people were it was happening, the show was going on as we were watching, and that was very, very exciting to me. That, I think, was the biggest invention, and now, of course, it's the computer.
So what did you do with no TV?
Oh my God, what didn't we do? We used to have a wall where I lived that was, the windows were up high, and it was like a storefront, but it was all brick on the side of the store. And we played handball, and we played king, and we played all kinds of games there.
It's a rubber ball
With a rubber ball. And then we used to have stickball in the street. And we had a Spalding, they used to call them. Spalding ball was a pink ball, and it bounced very high. And we would make bases out of anything, even newspaper, anything. And we would play softball. We would hit with a stick. We didn't have bats. Nobody had bats and balls. And what else did we do? Well, when we got a little bit older, we used to ride to New York City, go to Radio City Music Hall. We went to the beach. We went shopping. We did lots of things.
What about you, Dad? What sort of things occupied your time without television?
Well, we spent, as kids, we spent most of our time outdoors, winter and summer. In the summertime, we used to play stickball. And in Manhattan, you had many blocks, and each block had a stickball team. And, the teams varied with age. You had the older guys. We used to call them the big guys. We always look up to the big guys. They had a team, and then we had a team. We challenged each other from different blocks. And if you won the game, the prize was to keep the 2 Spalding balls that you used for the game. We all chipped in maybe a nickel each to buy the ball. And we also started playing softball. We played that in schoolyards. And most schoolyards had iron grates over the windows, so the ball wouldn't break through the glass. But we roller skated in the street, and we played hockey in the street. This is in Manhattan. When it snowed, we took out our sleds and we sleigh ride. We used to run and belly flop and slide in the middle of the road.
And ice skating?
You didn't have to worry about cars in those days. There weren't a hell of a lot of cars out.
Did you go ice skating too, Jimmy?
New York City was tough for ice skating.
See, we used to ice skate in Prosper Park. But the big thing with us, with my friends, we had a long porch. It was like 20 feet. It wasn't that wide, maybe 8 feet, 10 feet wide, but it was very long. And we used to play Monopoly and Parcheesi and all kinds of games. Even when it rained, it didn't matter because we were on that porch. It was covered over. So, but there was lots to do. It was much nicer than now with kids. A lot of times, all they do is play video games.
Yeah, no computers back then.
Right.
Well, the big thing we did, especially when we got a little older, a bunch of guys would go for long walks. And as you went on your long walk, a lot of gossip and talking and kidding to pass the time. Now, eventually I moved to Brooklyn. I believe I was around 12 years old, and it was a different thing. Because it was in the middle of the city. The kids were came from better backgrounds, and that new neighborhood in Brooklyn really influenced me.
So what did you do differently in Brooklyn, as far as
in
games?
Brooklyn we had fields, and that's how I learned how to play hardball and softball on regular fields, which we didn't have in Manhattan.
Tell us about what it was like to become a father. your first born son?
Well, with the first one, it was like a bittersweet situation because I was in the service, and Mary Ann was pregnant, and when finally,
I couldn't be with him right away.
after my basic training, I was assigned to a hospital in Pennsylvania. So I sent for Mary Ann, and we lived off post, where you were able, if the job was to work in the hospital 8 hours a day, you could live off post with a subsidy. So that's what we did. And my oldest was born in an Army hospital.
And for, you know, the first 2 weeks we moved there, we rented a place. It was $75 a month, and he was getting $90 a month as in the service. So we couldn't stay there too long. And then we went to, what was it? Not Peddler's Village.
Penn Village.
Penn Village,
In Pottstown,
which was for
Pennsylvania.
poor people. And it
Not
was
poor, there were a bunch of GIs lived there. We were forced to live there because we weren't making enough money.
it was for poor people.
We had to make our own heat. We had to buy coal.
Oh my
We had our
God.
own furnace, and we had to shovel the coal in the furnace, and what the hell did I know how to make a fire?
And the dust.
We made more
Oh.
mistakes, we had more cold winter days, right?
Yeah.
But eventually I learned.
It was very messy too, that heat. Very messy. And it was like $15 for the coal
We
each.
have a quarter of a ton or half a ton.
Yeah, each month. And then the rent, I think, was like $21. So that was still a big cut out of his salary. And we didn't go out too much. Maybe once in a while we'd go to a movie, that was about it.
Yeah.
And we'd have to take the children with us. I mean, the baby.
So
Oh, you know,
tell
I
us-
learned how to drive there, John. Let me tell you about driving. Oh my God, it just came to me. Dad, first of all, would drive to work. Actually, you drove, and how did you learn how to drive, Jimmy?
Well,
Oh, wait a minute. We went to to buy a car. I'm sorry. We went to buy a car, and we asked the guy, could you drive it home? He says, what are you talking about? So Dad says, well, neither one of us have a license yet. Neither one of us know how to drive. We had to get a car to learn how to drive. So we had to get the car. And then you tell him, Jimmy, how you learned.
Well, a bunch of GIs like me lived in Penn Village, and we'd like carpool to work. So I figured if I bought a car and I got a permit, I could carpool the guys and they could sort of show me and teach me. And that's how I learned.
You also learned on the base with the Jeep, didn't you? Basics.
Yeah, and also on my uncle's farm too, I was able to
Yeah.
drive.
And how about the day you got your license?
Yeah, what happened was it was...
Wait a minute, let me tell this story, and then you can tell it. I got my license. In order for me to get my license, Dad taught me how to drive, first of all. In order for me to get my license, we had a stick shift car, right? And one of the things you had to do was go up a hill. And when you were in the middle of the hill, you had to stop the car and then start it up again. Well, if you stopped it too long, you would roll back. And if you started it up too fast, when you're shifting, it stalled out. I managed to pass that. Then they had us do a K-turn. Now, a K-turn, you go forward first, then you turn, you back up, and then you go the other way. Well, you go forward. On one side was a stone wall. On the other side was a ditch. And it was not even 1.5 lanes that you had to do it in. It was very narrow. So my heart was in my mouth. Believe it or not, I did it. Then, there were a lot. Then we had to go through these cones. The cones were spaced about 1.5 feet apart. And you had to weave in and out of them. So that if you went too fast, you couldn't make the turn. Too slow, you would stall out because it was a shift car. It wasn't automatic. And a lot of people were knocking the pails down. Stop it.
Go ahead.
So anyway, it was very complicated, and I was all set to, then after that, you don't take a written exam, it's an oral one. So after you go through all of that he starts asking you questions. And one of the questions was, how far, when do you put your high beam on? Well, we used to call it the brights, and I didn't know what high beam was. And I almost failed. And then he remembered I was from New York. He says, you call it brights. And then I was able to answer the question. So then it was Dad's turn, and
Now
he
wait,
was
you
going to
gotta
go.
reverse. I went first.
Oh, he went first. I'm sorry, Jim.
All right, tell
You're
us
right.
about your,
Yeah, what happened was, in order obviously for me to teach her how to drive, I had to have to get the license first. So I made preparation to take the test and take the road test. And the road test was given in, I believe it was in December or January, I'm not quite sure. It was snowing, it was like a blizzard. And a friend of mine drove me up to the barracks because the state police would give the test in Pennsylvania. I walk into this barracks, and there's a couple of policemen sitting around a potbelly stove, nice and warm, drinking coffee. And they looked at me as if I was crazy walking in. They said, "What are you doing?" So I said, "Well, I'm scheduled to take a driving test." And they said, "Well, how'd you get here?" I said, "Well, I drove up here." And he said, "With who?" I said, "Well, my buddy. I have a permit." And they turned to the buddy and they said, "He drove himself all the way up here?" And he said, "Yeah." So they looked me over. I was in full uniform. They looked outside the window at the snow. They took my paperwork and stamped me that I passed the test. And compared to what I went through and what she went through, she's always resentful of how easy I got my license and she had to work.
okay, let's talk about your children a little bit.
Okay.
Tell us something about, I don't know, what they were like and what it was like having them and all
Well,
that.
first of all, we have 4 sons: Jim, John, Tom, and Bill. Jim, and there's 10 years between the oldest, and the youngest. But the first 3 I had in 4 years, and the first 2 were fine. But when the third one came along, it was very hard. Because what happened was my second oldest, John, would wake up in the middle of the night. He was only a year and a half old. And Tom was a baby, and he was waking up. And I remember one time getting up 12 times in one night. And Dad, of course, couldn't get up because he had to go to work. But we had a lot of fun together. What I used to do, we would go on walking tours because we only had one car, so Dad needed it to go to work. So one day, there was a holiday, everybody was off from school, and Dad says, "Why don't you take them somewhere?" And I says, "Well, how am I going to take them anywhere when I have no car?" And then I thought of fishing. I thought, oh gee, that would be fun. So I went into town to get tackle and lines, and I think they had fishing poles, but we had to get all the other goodies, the worms and everything else. And finally, we got it all together. Now, the youngest one was a baby at the time, so, excuse me, in order to get ready for the fishing, I made them all do chores. And we're all set to go out, and I realized that we need other stuff. So we got into the store, as I said, and we get all of the stuff together. And I'm pushing the baby in the carriage, and I have one holding on one side, one holding on the other side, and the other one, the oldest one, is carrying all the stuff. And we walk over to where I thought we could go fishing. And the guy comes over and he says, "Do you have a license to fish?" I said, "No, we don't have a license to fish." He says, "Well, you can't fish here." He says, "You have to walk, it's about 5 more blocks, across this big wide road." We get there, and my oldest son knew how to bait the lines and everything. Put them all in, and immediately the 3 lines get caught. So it was really a disaster, but I bet they'll remember it. My sons, I think you might remember it.
So were you a stay-at-home mom?
I stayed at home until my sons were going to college. And then Jim said that, "I wanted you to go to work." I said, well, if I go to work, I need an education. So in my 40s, I decided to go back to college. I had some college, but I got a 2-year degree in computer science, and then I worked about 10 years doing rating at I worked for Bell Labs for a while at Western Electric, doing computer stuff.
And Dad, what about you? What did you do for your career?
Well, I graduated college. I took courses towards teaching, and I became a teacher, taught science in high school. So before I went into the service, I worked in New York, in the city, at a parochial school for 3 years, St. John's Prep High School. I taught physics and math, chemistry. Then I got drafted for 2 years. And then when I came out of the service, we bought a place on Long Island, and I taught with the state, public schools. I taught at Bethpage for 5 years and Plainview for 5 years. And I took courses in administration and wound up in New Jersey as a high school principal in Old Bridge.
I wanted to tell you about the children. Being the mother of 4 boys, I was determined that they learn how to play ball. So the 3 older ones, well, the youngest one was about 4, so the older one was about 14. I got a baseball, and I got, a bat, and I got them all to go in the street, and I taught them softball the way I do it. And I would do that I guess I did it for a good 6 months, and finally the men in the neighborhood decided they would take over, and I was so happy. But we had a lot of kids in the neighborhood, so there was no trouble getting teams together. And I think they really enjoyed that. And then Dad made a big sandbox, and they used to play with the sandbox. We had a swing set. They had a lot to do. And I enjoyed having children. Even as a little girl, I remember when I was a little girl and I would see somebody with a baby, I would ask if I could walk them to the park. And I would walk the little baby in the baby carriage, and they were thrilled to have me. And I babysat for 5 kids one time. But I couldn't wait. I wanted to have children so bad, and I loved having them.
How long have you guys been married?
Do you know?
56?
It's going to be 57 years in May
Wow.
31st.
So what is the secret to having such a long marriage?
Well, you give 60% and he gives 60%, and then in between you make it work. I don't think there's any secret. I think you just have to be lucky in love. You have to not let things get to you. I think that after you're married a while, that exciting love dissipates, and it's a different kind of love. It's a strong love. And I'm afraid that a lot of the couples today, they think when that exciting type of love goes away, that they're no longer in love, and that isn't the case. It's not the way it is. You'd be crazy if you had to feel that way all the time. What do you think is the
Yeah,
secret,
it's called
Jim?
temporary insanity.
Yeah,
You
right.
can't be temporarily insane too long.
So what's your secret
But
for
I don't
a
know, I
happy
guess
marriage?
it was a give and take.
You gotta
But I
compromise.
gotta compromise. And,
Right. And really care about one
It's
another.
tough, it's tough to define. I think the main thing is that it never dawned on us that we were not gonna be married.
Yeah.
The awareness was different in those days.
We were brought up Catholic, and Catholics aren't supposed to divorce.
It's not even that, it was just the culture that they're from.
But I think, it was a lot more than that. There were times when I didn't want to do something, but he did, and I would do it, and vice versa. And, it's a partnership. It's not all one person doing everything. Compromise, I think, is the biggest thing.
Okay, go ahead.
I remember as a kid, a young kid, during the 30s when times were tough, It was unusual for somebody to have a house. All my relatives and friends all rented apartments. And the rentals were very low compared to today's standards. For example, a typical apartment in East Harlem was about $20 to $25 a month. But you know, that kind of money was
What was
meant
the
something
salary?
in the 30s.
What was the salary then?
The salaries were, you know, you're lucky if you, the rule was your month's rent should equal your salary per week. So if your rent was 25, you should be making at least $25 a week. That's how it worked. There's no such thing as credit cards. The only way you could get a loan was to go to the Shylocks in the neighborhood. These are the mobsters who loaned money out for like 20% a week. Banks were very tough. You couldn't borrow unless you had big collateral. When we bought a house, I had put $2,000 down, and the house was $14,000. And we paid off the house in New Jersey. And when we got married, the interesting thing was that I could afford for her to stay home. I was a school teacher. I wasn't making big money at all. But the value of my salary's purchasing power was enough that she could stay home. But you realize that eventually this couldn't happen anymore. That's why women go to work today. Because one salary can't keep the family going. Purchasing power isn't there.
What was it like in the Depression? Remember the Depression?
Yeah, well, during the Depression, nobody had money. There was welfare, where the government would provide money and food and even clothing if you were qualified. My father was a musician who was like working from day to day. He would go out and play with a friend of his who played guitar. And they passed the hat around. They'd hit the bars in downtown New York and pass the hat around and rely on the tips they would get. as a result
His
of their
father
playing.
was out of work for 10 years.
But,
So he did those things, you know,
but the
what did he
greatest
do?
thing was before World War II, during the defense program, when my relatives and people around us started to get steady work. My father started working building airplanes. And then later on he worked in a shipyard during the war. And after the war he wound up in a restaurant, managing, waitering, and cooking, and that's what he did for most of his life.
Now with me, John, I remember walking to school with holes in my shoes, and you would put cardboard in the shoe because you couldn't afford to buy shoes, or sometimes the flap, the sole of the shoe would come away, the stitching would come away, and you'd flap, and it was not uncommon because other kids had it too, you know. And when you went to when my parents went to buy shoes, they would buy it from a table, not in a shoe store. And the shoes were all thrown on the table, and those were the bargain shoes, and that's what we would get. I remember going one week, a whole week, with just potatoes in the house. My mother would make potato with rice, and potato with this, and potato with that. And it was very hard. My parents struggled a lot. Even Dad and I, even when we got married, when we were first married, and we first bought the house in Long Island, in Massapequa, we struggled a lot. There was no money left. The salary would go, there was no money for savings. So you go through hard times. Sometimes it makes it better for you. You learn how to struggle.
And do you have any grandchildren?
Oh, I have one natural grandchild from my son, Lisa Marie, who is now ready to go to college. She'll be graduating this year. And she was the delight of my life because we had so much fun together when she was growing up. I would teach her, I would sit her on my lap and play computer games with her. And one of the games, it was so cute, it was called Donald, and it was numbers like 1 to 5, 1 to 10. And she would look at the screen, and maybe there was a chickie on the screen, and she would flap her arms. Whatever they did on the screen, she would mimic, and she was so cute. She's grown up now and has a boyfriend, and now I have another delightful granddaughter through marriage. My son married a second time and divorced the first wife, and the second wife, Shirley, has a lovely granddaughter. So I have a very nice daughter-in-law and granddaughter now. I have two. And
Is there any-
my granddaughter, Lucy, is very, very bright. She's in college right now, and she's also working. And we play games together. We love games. Now I have a son whose name is John, who has a girlfriend, and I teased his girlfriend that she has to learn how to play games. So she played some games with us, and we had a good time.
Okay, John.
If you could do it over again, is there anything that you would change? Anything?
I tell you, I wouldn't discipline my children the way I did. I would definitely not hit them. I think the way they teach it now, to have time out, things like that, I think that's a much better way. I was hit as a child. I was strapped just about every day, and I don't think I was a bad child. But that's what I learned, and that's how I raised my children, and I would never do that again if I had it to do over. That's my biggest regret in life.
And what about you, Dad? Anything you'd like to do over? Or-
Yeah, if I could do over, I'd spend more time at home with the family. I found myself taking courses and going to school, and I'd work at school and then go right to classes. And, you know, the family suffered as a result of it. And second jobs, the same thing with second jobs. You know, if I could do over, I'd try to do everything possible not to be away that much. And then, you know, when I was a principal, that was even worse. I had to wind up going back to school after work so many times for meetings, etc. But it wasn't as bad because the kids were pretty grown up by that time.
Okay, one last question. Is there anything you'd like to say to future generations? Pass any message on to them? Let's say you were talking to Lisa's grandchildren or something like that.
I would say have a strong belief in God, because God and prayer can get you through the hard times. To me, my faith is very, very important to me.
What about you, Dad? Anything you could think of to?
Yeah, I would say that the best times are the early times, and that as you get older, you tend to dwell a lot on the earlier days. So my advice would be to enjoy your earlier days, because that'll be a memory, a strong memory as you get older.
Okay, I'd like to thank both of you, and glad we did this interview, and hope it comes out good.
Thank you for doing it.